Maulana, the program is now live on YouTube. So inshallah, we can start the program.
Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة لأهل التقوى واليقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمه الفداء واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. We talked about the understanding of or the research that we carry out on religion. And we said that if based on epistemology, we can try and have different approaches toward understanding faith. And those different types of understandings are experimental, intellectual, cognition of obedience, and mystical cognition. Now, the experimental is for scientific worldview, intellectual is religious, is a philosophical worldview, and cognition of obedience is religious worldview, and mystical cognition is Gnostic worldview. Now, this week, we said that we will talk about God. And if you remember, based on the worldview, either religious worldview or materialistic worldview, the foundation of both is to know God. If there is a God, and if we can prove the existence of a God, then our worldview will be religious, or it will be a divine worldview. But if we prove that there is no God, then we don't go down the line of religion. We don't study the attributes of God, the divine justice, the prophethood, the imamat, the day of judgment, nothing. And then our worldview will be completely materialistic. Therefore, the fundamental question is that, is there a God? And if we prove that yes, there is a God, that's when everything changes. Then our worldview will become a divine worldview, a worldview that is based on faith and religion. Now, once we prove that there is a God, then the entire study of worldview will be a divine worldview, and then we will study the attributes of God, and after the attributes, the divine justice, and then the guides from God, the prophets and the imams, and then the hereafter, the life after death. So therefore, our first and the most important part in lesson 5, what we are studying is that if there is a God. And to understand or to know that there is God, there are two approaches. One is called the Shanakhti Huduri, and the other one is called Shanakhti Husuli, the cognition through knowledge of presence and cognition through knowledge of acquisition. The knowledge of presence is with the prophets, imams, and people who are Gnostic. Again, irfan, mysticism. So through mysticism, they have the the knowledge of presence, huduri, meaning you understand God not through things, not through intellectual, logical, philosophical debates, but through introduction to God directly, through mysticism, through illumination in your heart. So, because we said that that is only possible for either infallibles or some very great mystics or even lay people, but few, not for all. Therefore, our approach towards religion should be the presence, the cognition through knowledge of acquisition, knowledge by acquisition, not by presence. Okay. Knowledge by acquisition is where you gain knowledge through logic, through reasoning, through philosophy. And that's the approach that we will be using in this book. Now, before we go on any further, there is a whole debate amongst the different scholars of different sciences, which is known to be the recognition of God through nature, or the intrinsic nature, fitrat, as it is called. In the Holy Quran also it has appeared, fitrat Allah allati fatara an-nas alayha. Allah has created everyone on the fitrat. Now the word nature or intrinsic nature, many people argue that we can prove the existence of God through intrinsic nature. Now, when we say that we can prove the existence of God through intrinsic nature, then we need to first understand and find out what nature is. And before we can go into understanding what nature is, we need to consider a few things. So 3 things are distinctive about fitrat. Number 1, different creatures all have similar intrinsic nature within their species, although there may be variations with regards to it being strong or weak. So the first point he argues, in logic, there is a whole debate that a genus has many species. So animal is a genus and it has many, many species. Human beings are one species of the animal, according to logic or in science. So in science, they argue that there are mammals, amphibians, reptiles, insects, birds. And then each one of those categories has further species. They all have species. So deer is one species, goat, wolves, these are all different species of animals. Now, all species have nature. Species, remember the word species, yes? No, when we say species, bani no, insan. Human beings are a species of animals. Now, so different creatures of all have a similar intrinsic nature within their species, although there may be variations with regards to it being strong or weak, but they will all have similar intrinsic nature, okay? So it should be common. Number 2, those things identified as belongings to intrinsic nature are found throughout the course of history and are firmly entrenched. So therefore, the intrinsic nature of a being is not the specific traits acquired over a long period of time that change due to changes in the environment over time. That's number 2. So first, all species, all members of the same species should have it. Number 2, all historical accounts, or over the time of, course of time, it should be applicable to all eras. So nature is something which applies to people 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. It will apply 100 years later, 1,000 years later. So it will apply to all members of the species and will apply to all times. It's not that nature has changed over time. No, nature will be something which is common for all times. Number 3, the intrinsic nature is independent of education and training, regardless of how much it can be intensified or guided by them. So it's not something that you learn through education and training. Every member of a species has it. That's what's called nature. So these are the 3 things that are regarded as nature. So based on science and reasoning, logic, philosophy, according to all of these things, these are the 3 conditions for something to be regarded as nature. Once you say that, okay, something is in nature, then you can divide the human nature, the intrinsic nature of mankind, can be divided into 2 parts. A, cognition related to the intrinsic nature of man and is not acquired through learning. And 2, those tendencies and impulses which are related to the intrinsic nature and are essential elements in the creation of every individual. So what happens is that there are, cognitions related to the intrinsic nature of man and is not acquired through learning. And the second one is those tendencies and impulses which are related to the intrinsic nature and are essential elements in the creation of every individual. So these are the 2 more important points. So sometimes you have inclinations, tendencies, which are the demand of creation of a creed or a species. Based on this, the awareness of God, is it established within every human being and is not a thing that man needs to acquire through research? Then it is called knowing God through intrinsic nature. Or is it that if all humans have the tendency towards worshiping God, then it would be known as worshiping God through intrinsic nature? Yes. So in lesson 2, he had debated that, religiosity or religious sentiments are regarded tendencies towards religion. So we all have tendencies, very briefly. There is a God gene, the Americans have argued. So does that God gene take us to the God or a God? So when we say that it is in our nature, some argue that you can get to the God, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Others argue that no, in our nature, there is a voice for calling for a God. And if we are guided to the God, then we will get to the God. Otherwise, if people around us tell us, no, the cow is a God, or fire is God, or the sun is God, then we will believe in those to be God. Allama, for example, argues that if human beings use their logic without any misguidance from outside, then they can get to the God. For example, he argues that if a person is born even in a jungle and says that, can this whole universe be created without, by itself, through, let's say, Big Bang Theory or whatever, by itself, or does it need a creator? So this universe needs a, yes, it needs a creator. I'm very, putting it very simplistically. So each one of these requires reasoning, which I'm not going to go into now. So does this universe require a creator or not? Well, nothing can come into being by itself, so it requires a creator. Does this creator, can it be powerless? Well, the universe is so complicated and so big that the creator needs to be very powerful. So it should be qadir, should be all omnipotent, all powerful. Does he lack knowledge? Can he have knowledge or can he not have knowledge? So he should be omniscient, alim. Can this God be dead at any time? Or, not present? No, because this universe is so big, we can't have this God not present at any time. So he must be hayy, ever living. For example, Allama. Others argue, like Sheikh Misbati Yazdi and like Athra Subhani and this, that we don't necessarily get to the God. We have in our nature the search for a God, and we can learn about the God, but not necessarily without guidance we can get to the God. But we have a voice from within that yes, there is a creator, he is all powerful, he's a God. All of those questions do come to mind. So he argues that one should study to recognize God, to understand God, and the cognition is from within. And there is a question about finding God. So we have finished lesson 5. Very briefly, I want to quickly, before we go on to lesson 6, say a few things. Some also argue that if you look at, all the people who deny God, and if this person went to prove God to a university, to, anyone who was an atheist, professors and students at university, and he asked them questions based on their own departments. So he said, do you believe in a God? He said, no, there is no God. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in a God. Okay. What do you do? So I'm a writer. Oh, good. Look at this book. So he gives them a book full of colors, intellectual writing. He said, what do you think of this book? He said, yes. He said, do you think this book could have come into being by itself? The person stopped and said, are you nonsense? So many colors, good writer, good publisher, all of these things have to be put together to form this book. Okay. So this book needs a creator, like a few people come together and create it, and you think this whole universe. So the person inquired. He said, went to another scientist, and he said, what do you do? He said, well, I am a scientist who works on DNA. He said, do each one of us have a DNA? Yes. He said, do you believe in God? He said, no, I don't believe in God. He said, so you're saying that everything has a DNA? He said, yes, even the plants have a DNA. He said, do all human beings have the same DNA? He said, no. Human beings have a similar DNA because they are species of one category, but they all have a different DNA because we all have different fingerprints and hair color, texture, everything. It's so complicated. He said, so are you telling me that each person's DNA is a whole book about them? He said, yes. He said, and you're saying that this book can be written about each person without, just in the air? He went quiet. He said, no. He said, so, so he went into so much details that the scientists had to admit that it is impossible that this human being can come into being. Now, without a creator, without any, just by itself. Now, in lesson 6, he wants to argue, again, we have not still gone into proving the existence of God. Now, he argues in lesson 6, the different ways of understanding God or cognition of God. Yes. If you go to different books, there are many, many different ways of proving the existence of God. There are many ways of which man can know God. These ways have been mentioned in various books of philosophy, theology, in discourses of the saints, and in the holy books of divinely revealed religions. And each one of them, they utilize different corporeal senses and experimental sciences. And others have applied only intellectual arguments as a premise of knowing God. Certain schools attempt to prove God directly, and certain schools try to prove only that his existence does not depend on any other existence, the necessary existence. In order to know his attributes, other arguments should be advanced. Now, let me explain all of this. Allama Yazdi argues that people have written many, many different types of books to prove the existence of God. Through philosophy, through theology, through mysticism, through many different ways. Some have gone very deep into proving the existence of God. Some have gone very simplistic. Some have been very simple. The example he gives is very beautiful. He says that if you want to cross a river, sometimes you can have a very simple bridge. A bridge which is made of wood, hanging onto ropes. And you can make that bridge on any part of the river on top, and you can just use that bridge to cross the river. But sometimes you need a very strong bridge because you're not going to be crossing the river by yourself. You're going to be driving a car, a truck, a bus, or probably taking some animals with you to cross the river. These animals may be sometimes small, like goats or sheep, and sometimes they are big, like cows and buffaloes, and even bigger, like camels and even elephants. Then you would need a very strong bridge. And that bridge has to be made of concrete, made of metal. It has to be strong. It may sometimes need poles to hold on to. So he says that if you really think about it, proving the existence of God, all you need is a simplistic bridge if you don't have any doubts in the mind. But if there are people who are creating continuous doubts in your mind, then you need a very strong bridge, a concrete bridge, a metal bridge, because your mind is full of doubts. So every person, based on their own mind, needs to study God in the worldview, but the proofs that they need can be of two types: simple or complicated. Now, simple proofs can be anything. It can be anything to prove the existence of God. Very simple proofs. And we will go into some simple proofs to prove the existence of God. So there are two ways of proving the existence of God. Number one, simplistic. What are those simple ways of proving the existence of God? The simple proofs will have a few common things. Number one, they do not require technical debates, technical, the language or preliminaries, so they're all very simple. The initial way to the most simple of all, and does not require any intricate or proficient premises. Okay? They need very simple. Number two, all you need to prove, through this path is the existence of the all-wise God, and that his attributes from his omniscience, his omnipotence, his wisdom, his that he is a creator, and all of these will be proven with simple proofs in their own place in theology. So all you do is that in simple proofs that you prove the existence of God. And number three, this methodology is used to simply awaken the human nature to recognize God, that God is in your nature and it is intrinsic nature. Therefore, you wake up to the belief and reflect upon the existence of God and the beauty of God's attributes. And number four, many of the saints, religious authorities, religious figures, and people who are working hard and very pure, very clean in their heart, they use these to invite the people, the common people, to believe in God without debating, without going too deep into the proofs, without proving it through philosophy or scientific proofs. So this is the simplistic way. So these are the simple ways. And he then gives examples of some of the simple ways, some of the familiar signs. For example, the Holy Quran says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, do you not think into the signs of God that leads you to God, the creation of this universe? And one of the most simplistic ways of understanding God is through his creation. You look at the creation of God, all the different animals, their nature, and all of them lead you to God. So he's given many, many examples. And this whole universe, that this universe is so well organized, it is so systematic. And this systematic universe leads you to believe that the Creator is one. And the Creator has given this organization, otherwise there would be a conflict in this world. The Holy Quran says that if there were other gods other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this universe, then you would see a conflict in this whole universe. This universe is running on such, there are billions and billions of stars, and they have their own planets, and everything is on rotation, and everything is on a move, but nothing crashes, nothing hits each other, So, and even if there is a shooting star, then they blew up they blow up while they're in the space. So it is so well organized. Everything happens so systematically that it leads you to believe in God. So this is the most simplistic proof on the existence. It is called Burhane Nazm. Burhan is basically the proofs on the existence of God. There are many, many proofs that people have used. Some of the great philosophers have used to prove the existence of God. And the most simple proof on the existence of God is Burhan Nazm, the proof of the universe being so systematic and organized. Things, like there are so many animals that eat the grass, and then there are, so the food cycle, if you look at the food cycle, then all of that leads you to believing in a God. So there are so many simplistic proofs, the nature of animals, all of them, they lead you to God. So there are three, for example, movements of Earth. The Earth rotates on its axis, that makes a day and night, and then it rotates around the sun, that make the year. The different weathers. The winter, summer. And then the whole of this solar system is on a move, and this whole system moves in a galaxy, and the whole galaxy is on a movement in the Milky Way. And so everything is going in circle. Everything is in tawaf. And a mystic was asked, why is everything in tawaf? Why is everything moving in circle? He said, if you look at a moth, it just goes around the light in circles because it loves the moth. This whole universe is in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, therefore it has gone crazy in the love of Allah, and that's why everything is rotating in the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like a moth. Yes? So this whole universe, everything leads you to God. Whatever you look at, the animals, the insects, the bees, the way they are, so Allah has created everything in such a beautiful way that everything, is in harmony with each other. Harmony, yes? Nothing is in contradiction to each other. The sun, the moon, the planets, and then the galaxy, the earth and itself, the plants, the animals, the insects, everything is in harmony, except for human beings. But we don't want to go into that. So if we think of all of these bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of these bounties lead us to believe in the Almighty Allah, that He is the one who bestows all of these bounties onto us. He is the ultimate creator. He is the ultimate authority. He is the one running the whole show. So these are very simple proofs. So without going into complications, without going into any philosophy, without going into logic, you prove the existence of God. And in the next lessons, inshallah, we will cover, you can go into three layers, to be honest: the simplistic proofs and then complicated. In the complicated, there are moderately complicated, and very complex proofs on the existence of God. In this book, we will not be going into very complex proofs on the existence of God, very deep proofs of the existence of God. You have the longer books in philosophy and in theology. So there are many, many books in logic, well, in philosophy and in theology, and even in mysticism, that go very deep and very complex arguments to prove the existence of God. And not just one proof, and they will go on and on and on for years teaching those books in philosophy, in theology, and also in Irfan, in mysticism. And those are more complex, all of those. This is a theological book based on philosophy and simple proofs. So we have done some simplistic proofs, but we will also be going into some deeper proofs, some more difficult, some more complex, but not very complex. So there's still, again, in the next lesson, we will do some proving the existence of God, but through simple logic and simple philosophy. And then we will, inshallah, study the attributes of God. What are, so we will, inshallah, prove that He is the necessary being. And the necessary being, what should be the, and that doesn't prove that necessary being is God. And then we will talk about the attributes of that necessary being. And those prove that necessary being is God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, everyone so far? And then we will prove that that necessary being is God. So simply, we went into simple proofs today. And in simple proofs, you can use nature, you can use the Burhan in Nazm, which is the simplest Burhan, the simplest proof on the existence of God. The harmony and systematic, everything is in harmony with each other. so well organized. So that's the simplest proof on the existence of God. Now, very quickly, I want to give you, inshallah, in the next lesson, we will do some more complex, but not, so I'll try and simplify it as much as possible. But inshallah, that's our next lesson on the existence of God. But today, what we want to say is that, this Lord that we are saying, that in very simple proof that everything is in harmony. So this Lord is the creator of this whole universe. One story I want to very quickly mention, and then some of the attributes. And then we'll go deeper probably next week. So there was this king, he debated. Well, he was talking to one of his wazirs, one of his ministers, or whatever you call them, deputies in the kingdom, who used to run. He was very wise, and he said, not everything that exists requires a creator. So the minister said, no, everything that exists requires a creator. He said, no, you're absurd. So the minister tried to argue with the king, like many of the, usually power makes you arrogant. So he very arrogantly said, stop your stupid arguments, and I do not wish to listen to you. So the minister just went quiet and could not prove anything. But to prove his point, what he did was he got an engineer, and he got some very good builders, an architect, to build a very beautiful palace right next to the river. When they spent, a few years, or something like 2 years, making that palace, the minister said to the king, said, let's travel through your kingdom. And he brought him towards that palace. He said, what is this? Such a beautiful palace in my kingdom, and I didn't know. Who made it? The minister said, well, it came into being by itself. He said, how can something come into being by itself? He said, well, you argued 2 years ago that not everything that comes into being by itself, requires a creator. He said, okay, now you've proven your point. Tell me who. So then he explained to him that I made it to prove my point. So number one, we know that this whole universe requires the creator. Number two, so this is very simple proof. In the oncoming lessons, we're going to do. Number two, this creator must be all wise, Hakim, because this universe is so complicated, so he must be wise. Number three, he must be all powerful, Qadir. Number four, he must be all knowing, omniscient, Alim. Number five, so you can come to conclusion that he must have all of these qualities through which he has created this universe, and he's ever living. He controls this whole universe. So this is the most simple. Even just looking at the human body, the human creation, the human soul and body, we can reach a conclusion that there is a creator. There are millions and millions of cells in human body. And, the experts have done so much research on human body, and they still don't know so much. Likewise, soul, some even deny it. So the soul exists, and we don't know so much about the soul, the human mind, the mental powers of humanity, spiritual powers of humanity. Human beings are physical, and all of those things. So all of these prove that that this is your Lord. How will you deny him? So the human beings can reach God through very simple proofs. One hadith I want to mention before I take questions. In our Ilm Kalam Theology, our Imams were asked, Maula, do we all need proofs on the existence of God? Imam said, yes. He said, we all do. He said, yes, you need to have a proof for yourself that God exists. He said, what sort of proof? He said, it could be simplistic, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be very complicated, but you should prove God to yourself through logic, through reasoning, at least a proof. He said, but how simple can that proof be? He said, anything. They were talking while they were walking in the streets of Medina. So the Imam al-Islam, when passing by a household, he saw an elderly woman sitting and there in front of her door of the house, and she was making the thread through the weaving machine. You know, in the olden days, they used to have simple, very simple machine where they would make the thread. The thread wasn't as thin as it is today. You know, it was thick thread. But so he looked at her and he said, do you believe in God? To that lady, the elderly woman. She said, yes, I believe in God. I believe in one God. The Imam al-Islam smiled and he said, do you have any proofs? She started thinking. She was an illiterate woman. She could not, you know, she started thinking. She thought and she said, yes, I have a proof. The Imam al-Islam said, what is your proof? She said, if this small machine requires an elderly woman like me to run it, then how can this whole universe be without God? There must be a God. So the Imam al-Islam smiled and he said, yes, you're right. So he said, you are, you know, for example, a learned woman. And then he turned to that student of his and he said, it could be as simple as this. So when I say that you all need, the Imam al-Islam said, when I say that you all need a proof on the existence of God, you all need to prove that there is a God. It could be a proof as simple as this elderly woman, as this simple, uneducated woman's proof. And she will be resurrected as a very learned woman because in her own capacity, she has a proof on the existence of God. So you don't need complicated proofs, but inshallah, we will go into some of the complicated proofs on the existence of God. All you need is just some simple proofs based on your own needs. You need to study the existence of God deeper when you have more confusions or more questions or more criticisms in your mind about the existence of God. That's when you need deeper books and deeper studies on the existence of God. Did I explain that? Does everyone understand? You can ask questions.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Maulana. Yes, there are some questions. Momneen, if you'd like to ask a question verbally, then use the raise hand function and I'll unmute you. The two written questions, I think it's a double question. So it says that if the universe is made so perfect and all in harmony, etc., then why have some people not believed in the Creator? And then the second part of the question is, why has the Creator said in the Quran that He has put a seal on their hearts? Are these the people who are referred to?
Okay, I'll answer the two questions separately because there are two questions, to be honest. Number one, so why do some people not believe? It is basically, kullu mawludun yuladu ala fitratil Islam. The Holy Prophet says every child is born on the nature or the intrinsic nature of Islam, meaning believe in one God, belief in one God. It is their parents, it is the child's parents who make them Jew, Christian, or Zoroastrian, or not make them accept God or Trinity, or sometimes deny the Holy Prophet or the Holy Quran. So what happens is that yes, the world is, the whole universe is in harmony, but sometimes the explanation given to them is that, oh, that's how this universe is. Without a creator, it is like that. So when scientists sometimes start to disbelieve, most of the scientists, yes, have been, great scientists have been believers, but when some scientists start to disbelieve, they create more questions in the minds of the people. So then the people start denying. It is not that the questions arise in the minds of the people from the beginning. So the world is in harmony, and that is a very simplistic proof. and it leads to the existence of God. Then Allah SWT says Allah has placed seals on their hearts. It is not that Allah does not wish to guide those people. Allah guides, or He sends a signs, and the people continue to reject. And when they continuously reject, there comes a time when Allah places a seal on their hearts, and therefore He no longer guides them. Not that He misguides them, He no longer guides them. So when Allah says that, He misguides people, the misguidance is not literal, it is withdrawal of guidance. He withdraws the guidance, and therefore the people are misguided. Because if Allah leaves a person and does not guide them anymore, then they need no one to misguide, because then Allah will not guide. Does that answer the question?
Jazakallah. And then there's another question. What are the two terminologies used for the approaches to identify God? I think
the two approaches are ilm huduri and ilm husuli. Ilm huduri is when you have the knowledge, is the English term. Are you asking, or are you asking for the Farsi and Arabic term? So cognition through knowledge of presence, that's called huduri, ilm huduri. And ilm husuli is called the cognition of knowledge by acquisition. Husuli is when you acquire knowledge, when you gain knowledge, when you learn. And huduri is something that you have. So it is very straightforward, or sometimes it's called obvious. So sometimes, things which are obvious, and some things which require thinking, and which require that you gain knowledge.
Jazakallah. And there's one other question. So it's saying, so the people who are satisfied with simple proofs, are they naturally closer to Allah?
Okay, they can be naturally closer to Allah because they don't have many doubts in their mind. Sometimes we have doubts from within, and sometimes we hear so many things that doubts are created. Sometimes we go through difficult times, patches in life, and lack of knowledge, or different things happen, that the doubts are created from within. And there comes a time when you have no doubts. People who do not require many proofs can be closer, because sometimes they don't have so many doubts, but sometimes they're very simple. They're very, so sometimes, they're very educated, but sometimes they're not educated. That's why they don't have any doubts in mind, and therefore they don't require so much research. And sometimes, even simple people can have many doubts. But mostly it is the educated people who have more doubts, because they have more questions, because their intellectual needs are higher. So it is not necessarily that they are further away from God, but they must answer those doubts. And there comes a time that those educated and highly demanding people intellectually will reach a level in studying God that they will no longer have questions or doubts in their mind about God. So we excel over time. But sometimes people continuously have doubts all their lives.
Jazakallah. A very related question. If one is already happy and satisfied with the simple proofs of God, then is it necessary or even advisable to go deeper?
It's not necessary for them to go deeper. And it is not even advised for them to go to deeper, but it is only advised because sometimes at the moment they may not have any doubts in mind, but in the future other people may create doubts in mind. So it is good to always study. So it is always advised to study deeper, because it only, if you don't have any doubts and you are satisfied that there is God, it is only advised to study deeper to strengthen your faith, to make you so strong that you will never ever doubt. So it is always advised to study deeper and deeper all the time. And it improves our knowledge, it helps our knowledge, and it helps us sometimes to prove to others. Sometimes I've debated with atheists or people who are agnostic, have no faith at all. People don't, sometimes, they don't believe in God, sometimes they have no faith. So I've debated, and if I did not have the deeper knowledge or the deeper understanding, I don't think I could have debated or proven God to them, or I could have shown them the path. So some of these people that I have debated with, they have, they had their own questions, and when, I discussed the proofs, they said, we never thought that people who believe in God could have so much logic and deep understanding of this universe and deep understanding of our needs who deny God. So sometimes you need it to, and sometimes you debate and you create doubts in your own mind. So you must not debate until and unless you have deeper understanding. That's why it's advised. That's why it's advised to always have deeper understanding and deeper study of religion and of proofs on the existence of God.
Thank you. And a question regarding, is there any recommended books about deeper proofs?
There are many. Even in this book, we will be going deeper. I've only done the simple proofs today. I haven't done the deeper proofs. He's not going to go very, very deep, but he's going to go a bit deeper. And then you can have, Man and Universe by Shaykh Musa Mutahari. You can have, there are so many books even in English, Allah by Yasin T. Jaburi. And there are so many books which go deeper. And then there are many, many, many books that go deeper, even in English.
Okay. Question. Can Muslims believing in God do shirk?
This is not found in the hadith books, but mystics have argued that you can have two types of shirk. Shirk jali and shirk khafi. Shirk jali is when you have shirk, when you disbelieve in God openly, or when you believe there are many gods. And shirk khafi is when you believe in one God and you have hidden shirk, when you worship fame or wealth or your evil desires, or have you seen the one who has taken his evil desires to be his God? So you can have that, and you don't realize that you have not truly worshipped God, and you have. But these are not found in these books. But these are these terminologies. But the Holy Quran talks about them, and even the Hadith talks about them indirectly, not directly. So this shirk, khafi, and jali are not terminologies of the Holy Quran and Hadith, but they're terminologies based on the Quran and Hadith.
Jazakallah. I've got one question. It's related to another question that's been written. And I think you kind of touched on it already. So the normal or the easy proofs that we would tell ourselves and to non-Muslims are normally around the nature and how creation is so perfect, etc. But now, because of the theories being taught as if they're fact in schools and in colleges and universities, basically your professor, your teacher, everyone considers those scientific theories as fact. So due to that, we're seeing obviously a lot of children of many faiths, they just lose their faith, and the parents typically, the normal way of educating isn't enough for them to be able to give sufficient proofs. So any advice on that? And then a related question, Sister Ghazala has asked whether there's any specific book you would recommend regarding God's existence that could be given to atheists or non-Muslims.
Shaykh Musa Mutahari's Man and Universe is good, so it's Jahan Bini's worldview with a lot of deep study, a lot of proofs. But a person has to be educated, to be honest, to go into that book. So the English is difficult, and it is a book which is philosophical. So a lot of terminology, and then he's gone quite deep. He's taught it at university, Tehran University. So it is a very good book, but it is very deep. There are other books. So you can have very simple books by, like Introduction to Islam, and Islamic Theology, Allama Tabatabai, Introduction to Islam. So there are many, many books that you can give to an atheist or a non-Muslim about Islam. And Tabatabai, Musa Mutahari are good writers. Their books will be logical and philosophical. And your question about, in schools, they teach about Darwin theory and so many other things that, these are, so the DNA, human DNA is very close to the chimpanzees, and therefore we must have evolved, and the theory of evolution. And many other theories, but mainly this is the theory. It's not a proven fact, but then, there are more and more proofs that they're gathering. You see, always remember, sometimes, you have the correct belief and you can start gathering proofs on your correct belief. You may have one or two proofs, but you have correct belief. And sometimes you have the wrong belief and you have gathered more proofs on your wrong belief. More evidence, 10, 20 proofs on your wrong belief. So sometimes, the theory of evolution is presented as proven fact, and then there are so many scientific evidence to prove it, they would argue. There is a lot of scientific evidence that says, yes, we may have evolved. But it is not a proven fact, number one. Number two, I think it is called takamul. In Arabic, it is called, evolution. Theory of evolution is called, I'm sure this is what you're referring to. So the theory of evolution is called takamul in Arabic. And there is a whole book by a number of scholars who have come together under Shaykh Behishti to write takamul fil Islam. I think 3 volumes or more. Philosophy of Islam, if you study, by Shaykh Behishti. It's not republished now, but there are many, many scholars who have come together and answered all of those criticisms and all of those debates from science and the scientific evidence to prove, so there are many scholars and even scientists, Muslim scientists and Christian scientists, who have written extensively on God and proven his existence and refuted the different theories, and especially takamul, evolution. That so I think the whole, so if you look at some of the greatest scientists like Einstein and like others, who all believed in God, and they did not deny that there is God. So they all believed, and I think we need to prove that some of the greatest scientists ever to have lived were they were all faithful people, Muslims, Jews, Christians. They were all believers in God. And I think we need to present to our children that today, yes, unfortunately, in 20th century and 21st century, a lot of the scientists and people who are inventors are either atheists or non-Muslim, non-believers, but in the past they've all been believers, and current medicine and everything is based on the study of some of those greatest scientists who have contributed in the field of science. And they were all believers. But I think we need to give a deeper understanding to our children as well, not only just in theology or in madrasas, but at school level, college level, and at university level. And I think higher level books should be also taught for adult classes. Thank you very much. I think the time has ended now.
Jazakallah. And the recording will be on YouTube. It is a private recording. Inshallah, all the students who are registered will be given a link after via email. Thank you very much. Jazakallah.
Thank you.